They say a courtroom is a place where justice rises above pride. But on this day, pride walked in first. The room was charged with tension, packed with journalists, students, and citizens eager for drama. All eyes shifted when Detective Marcus Kane entered, famous for his sharp mind, but infamous for his arrogance. He wasn't there just to testify. He was there to perform. Across from him sat Judge Henry Wallace, calm, seasoned, and unshaken after decades on the bench. No one expected what happened next. With a smirk, the detective openly mocked the judge, turning the trial into his own stage. The crowd gasped, whispers filled the chamber, and for a moment it seemed Marcus had stolen the spotlight. But beneath the judge's silence lay a hidden move that would soon stun everyone, flipping arrogance into humiliation and rewriting the course of the trial forever. I never thought a single morning could feel so heavy, so electric, as if every heartbeat in the city pulsed through the walls of that old courthouse. I stepped through the grand wooden doors, polished by decades of history, and immediately felt the tension pressing against me, like invisible hands trying to pull me into the story about to unfold. The air smelled faintly of ink, polished oak, and something indefinably sharp: anticipation. Cameras lined the edges of the gallery, journalists murmuring, pens scratching across paper, whispers spreading faster than wildfire. At the center of it all, moving with a confidence that bordered on arrogance, was Detective Marcus Kane. He was the kind of man who walked into a room and made it about himself, whether anyone wanted it or not. Everyone knew him. Brilliant, ambitious, and yes, undeniably effective. But beneath that brilliance lurked something darker. He had a way of twisting the truth, bending rules, and charming his way past consequences. Today, he wore a tailored suit that reflected the morning sun, a slight smirk curving his lips, and eyes that seemed to calculate every reaction before it happened. Opposite him, sitting calmly behind the bench, was Judge Henry Wallace, a man whose reputation was built on decades of integrity. In his 60s, with a demeanor that commanded respect without demanding fear, Wallace had earned the trust of his peers, lawyers, and the public alike. Unlike Marcus, his authority was quiet but absolute, his mind sharp, and his sense of justice unshakable. People spoke of him in hushed tones, not because he was intimidating, but because he represented the rarest form of power, moral certainty. And as I took my seat in the gallery, I realized that today, these two forces, one brimming with unchecked pride, the other steady with principled calm, were about to collide in a way that would change lives, challenge assumptions, and expose the raw human drama that often hides behind courthouse doors. The trial that morning was already legendary for its stakes. A wealthy businessman accused of massive fraud, bribery, and corruption. But what drew attention wasn't just the case itself. It was the personalities involved. Marcus Kane, in particular, seemed determined to turn the courtroom into his personal stage. His every gesture, every glance, every calculated pause screamed, "I'm the center of this universe." He leaned casually on the witness stand before the proceedings even began, scanning the jury with a smile that suggested he already owned their admiration. Yet Judge Wallace sat unmoved, observing quietly, like a lighthouse standing firm against a storm of arrogance and chaos. From my perspective, the gallery was a theater of contrasts. The audacious detective, the composed judge, the tense lawyers, and the audience whose collective breath seemed to hang in the air. Even the stenographer paused, as if sensing the magnitude of what was about to unfold. I could see the flash of cameras, hear the faint click of shutters, the low murmur of whispered speculation. Everyone had a role to play, yet no one could anticipate how quickly the balance of power would shift. As the proceedings began, Marcus's voice cut through the room, smooth, commanding, dripping with self-assurance. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, tilting his head and smiling at the jury, "you are about to witness true brilliance at work. Every step, every piece of evidence, Every revelation that comes before you is because of me. Watch closely, for you may never see such skill again." A soft sigh came from the judge, almost imperceptible, but to those who knew him well, it carried the weight of a man ready to let truth, not spectacle, dictate the outcome. "Detective Kane," Judge Wallace intoned, voice calm yet firm, "you are here to provide testimony. This is a courtroom, not a stage. Speak only when spoken to." Marcus tilted his head, smirking. "With respect, Your Honor, perhaps it is the public who should decide the value of truth. After all, their attention is the only currency that matters." A ripple of tension moved through the gallery. Journalists exchanged rapid whispers. The jury shifted uneasily. Even the court officers straightened in anticipation. And in that moment, I realized this trial would be remembered not just for its legal stakes, but for the collision of character, pride, and principle. Judge Wallace did not flinch. He had faced many challenges in his career, but Marcus Kane was unlike any opponent he had ever encountered. Brilliant, but dangerously arrogant. The judge's eyes narrowed ever so slightly, a spark of quiet determination shining through. He had prepared meticulously for this trial, understanding that the detective's showmanship was a mask for deeper flaws. Today, Wallace would expose those flaws, not for vengeance, but to uphold justice, human decency, and the lessons that transcend the courtroom. That integrity matters, that truth prevails, and that moral courage is stronger than any charm, wealth, or clever manipulation. And so, as the gavel came down to officially begin the trial, I leaned forward, heart racing, knowing that what I was about to witness was more than a legal proceeding. It was a story about power and morality, arrogance and humility, deception and integrity. A story that would teach, entertain, and resonate long after the final verdict. And in that quiet, intense moment, I realized that Detective Marcus Kane and Judge Henry Wallace were not just participants in trial. They were embodiments of the choices every human must face, whether to seek glory at the expense of others or to stand firm, even when the world challenges your convictions. The courtroom's air was taut with tension, each person sensing that today's trial would not unfold like any other. Detective Marcus Kane, who had made a habit of bending the rules, leaned back in his chair and smirked at Judge Wallace. "Your Honor," he said, voice dripping with sarcasm, "I do hope you can keep up with the brilliance of the evidence I'm about to present. I wouldn't want anyone to be overwhelmed by my meticulous methods." A ripple ran through the courtroom. The gallery tensed. Journalists clicked cameras furiously, sensing the drama. But Judge Wallace did not flinch. He adjusted his glasses and regarded Kane calmly, a faint smile tugging at his lips, not of amusement, but of quiet confidence. "Detective Kane," Wallace said evenly, "the court does not measure brilliance by arrogance, nor by theatrics. We measure truth by facts, consistency, and integrity. I suggest you proceed accordingly." Marcus scoffed, leaning forward with a glint in his eyes. "Ah, integrity," he mocked, letting the word linger in the air like a challenge. "A noble concept, Your Honor, but sometimes practicality must outweigh ideals, don't you think?" The gallery gasped softly, whispers spreading through the room. Everyone could feel the tension, the palpable clash of personalities, arrogance against principled calm, ego against moral authority. Marcus was clearly attempting to provoke Wallace, to rattle him, perhaps hoping to make the judge stumble in front of the jury. Wallace, however, was not so easily manipulated. He had anticipated such behavior from Marcus, a man who thrived on control and spectacle. And now came the moment that would leave everyone in shock. The judge's next move, the one that would turn the trial on its head. "Detective Kane," Wallace said, voice measured, calm, but commanding attention. "Before we continue, I would like to address the court with a procedural matter. You may not realize it, but the documents you have presented today contain a critical oversight, one that could undermine not only your credibility, but the entire investigation you claim to have conducted flawlessly." Marcus blinked. The smirk faltered. "Oversight," he said, leaning forward, try to regain composure. "I assure you, Your Honor, every detail has been carefully verified." "On the contrary," Wallace interrupted, raising a hand to silence him. "The document you submitted yesterday omits essential correspondence between your office and the defendant's accountants. Evidence of selective disclosure, which, if left unaddressed, could be construed as intentional manipulation. Detective Kane, are you willing to explain why these communications were excluded?" The courtroom erupted in stunned murmurs. Cameras clicked, pens scribbled furiously, and even the jury seemed momentarily frozen. Marcus's face tightened, his confidence visibly cracking. He opened his mouth to respond, but Wallace held up another hand. "And furthermore," the judge continued, "I have reason to believe these omissions were not mere oversights. I have requested an independent review of all your prior cases, Detective Kane, to ensure that patterns of selective reporting do not compromise justice. This review will be submitted to this court and made part of the official record. Do you understand the gravity of this situation?" Marcus's eyes darted around the room, searching for an ally, a way to charm his way out, a sympathetic nod from the gallery, but found none. He was alone, exposed, and for the first time, truly accountable in front of everyone. The detective, who had spent years mocking authority and flaunting his genius, was suddenly on the defensive, his arrogance rendered ineffective by the judge's calm precision. Wallace's move had done more than challenge Marcus's methods. It had exposed the core lesson of the trial. Brilliance alone does not grant immunity from ethics. Power alone does not exempt one from responsibility. The judge had transformed the courtroom into a living lesson on integrity, accountability, and the human consequences of arrogance. Witnesses who had been intimidated by Marcus's reputation now spoke more freely. A junior accountant, once trembling under the detective's probing, now found courage in Wallace's unwavering fairness. I remembered emails," the accountant said, voice quivering but firm. Emails that Detective Kane didn't present. They showed discrepancies in the timeline. Marcus's attempt to interrupt failed. Wallace allowed the witness to continue, nodding slightly, reinforcing the principle that every voice mattered, every detail was essential, and no intimidation could override the pursuit of truth. The courtroom, once a stage for Marcus's arrogance, had now become a theater of human courage, ethical choices, and educational revelation. As the day progressed, Wallace continued to guide the trial with quiet authority. Each move Marcus made to belittle, manipulate, or mock was countered not with anger, but with strategic clarity. The judge's interventions were precise, exposing inconsistencies without personal attacks, emphasizing fairness, and reinforcing the lesson for everyone present. That justice is an obligation, and character is as important as intellect. By late afternoon, the tipping point came. Marcus Kane, realizing he could no longer control the narrative, lashed out subtly at Wallace in front of the jury. "Your Honor," he said, voice icy, "with all due respect, I believe the court is misunderstanding the subtleties of complex investigations. Not all truths are obvious at first glance." Wallace's eyes, calm but piercing, met Marcus's. "Detective Kane," he replied slowly, deliberately, "truth is not determined by subtlety alone, nor by clever manipulation. It is determined by facts, honesty, and the ethical application of knowledge. And while you may believe your brilliance allows you to circumvent these principles, the court will always measure actions against standards that protect human dignity and fairness." A hush fell over the courtroom. Even the gallery felt the weight of those words. Marcus's jaw tightened, his bravado faltered. Wallace had not yelled, had not humiliated him publicly, but in a single, composed response, he had dismantled Marcus's posturing completely. The shock was palpable. The detective, who had spent years mocking authority, had finally met an opponent whose moral clarity and strategic precision could not be undermined. And in that moment, the trial transformed from a legal proceeding into a profound lesson on human behavior, ethics, and the subtle power of principled authority. Witnesses grew more confident. Jurors leaned forward with curiosity and anticipation, and even the media recognized that the story unfolding was far richer than scandal. It was an exposition of human values, courage, and integrity. By the late afternoon, the atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted dramatically. Detective Marcus Kane, once the dominant figure, now moved with caution. Every gesture, every word was measured, yet his arrogance still lingered beneath the surface, a barely contained storm. His smirk was tighter, his eyes darting, searching for an escape or a distraction, but Judge Wallace left no room. Wallace, composed and unwavering, allowed the witnesses to speak freely, reinforcing the principle that justice relied not on intimidation or manipulation, but on truth. The first of the key witnesses, a mid-level accountant named Evelyn Shaw, stepped forward. She had been coerced and silenced in previous statements, but now, under the calm presence of Wallace and the undeniable evidence of omitted emails and records, she spoke openly. "I remember now," Evelyn said, her voice steadying. "Emails between Detective Kane and our department were selectively edited before being presented. They show instructions to omit certain transactions that could have exonerated our client." Gasps filled the gallery. Kane's face hardened, a flash of panic crossing his features. He attempted to interrupt, leaning over the podium with a tone that was both commanding and condescending. "Ms. Shaw, surely you understand the nuance. These adjustments were for clarity, for precision. The law is complicated. Sometimes minor omissions are necessary for focus." Judge Wallace raised a hand. "The court will not accept euphemisms for manipulation. Every document, every omission has real consequences. Shaw, you are protected here. Speak freely." And speak she did. With each word, the carefully constructed facade of Kane's brilliance began to crumble. The detective had relied on fear, charm, and his reputation to control the narrative, but Wallace's methodical exposure of inconsistencies gave witnesses courage. Evelyn presented the omitted emails, highlighting explicit instructions to misrepresent data, leaving the jury and spectators stunned. Meanwhile, Kane's inner turmoil became evident. His usual calm arrogance began to fracture, revealing the man beneath the showmanship. He whispered to his assistant, glanced at the jury, and tried to regain control by sarcastically questioning the judge's authority. "Your Honor, you are twisting nuances into malice. Surely a detective's judgment cannot be so easily dismissed by theory." Wallace's calm reply cut through the tension like a sharp blade. "Detective Kane, this is not theory. It is evidence. Ethics are not optional. Responsibility is not negotiable. And arrogance cannot shield one from accountability." The courtroom, which had initially been enthralled by Kane's charisma, now found itself riveted by Wallace's moral clarity. The lesson was clear. Integrity and justice were stronger than cunning or charm. The jurors leaned forward, journalists scribbled feverishly, and spectators whispered amongst themselves, recognizing that what they were witnessing was more than a trial. It was a study in character, consequence, and human decency. As the day wore on, Wallace continued to expose Kane's inconsistencies, each step calculated to educate without humiliating. He called forth additional witnesses, each one corroborating evidence of selective reporting, subtle threats, and the manipulation of facts. Kane's attempts to intimidate were met with Wallace's unwavering authority, forcing him into the role of a man cornered by truth. It was during this period that Kane made his most desperate move. Sensing that his reputation was crumbling, he attempted to appeal to the jury's fascination with his brilliance, launching into a dramatic recount of his prior cases, highlighting his successes and painting himself as a misunderstood genius. "You see," Kane said, gesturing broadly, "I have caught criminals, solved puzzles others deemed impossible, and brought justice where none was expected. Do not let technicalities or minor oversights cloud your judgment of my contribution." But Wallace had anticipated this tactic. He leaned forward, voice calm but commanding, and addressed both the jury and Kane. Detective Kane, brilliance without accountability is nothing more than vanity. Achievements do not excuse unethical actions. And the court will weigh character alongside skill, actions alongside words. This trial is not merely about results. It is about the principles that govern a just society. The shock of Wallace's words was tangible. Kane, who had mocked the judge repeatedly, was now being measured by the very principles he had flouted. For the first time, the detective's charm failed. His attempts to dazzle could not overcome moral scrutiny. The detective's last words were a whisper of frustration, almost regret, but the courtroom felt the weight of the lesson. Here was a man who had wielded power and intellect without moral guidance, confronted by the steady force of integrity, justice, and human decency. By the time the courtroom emptied, the impact was clear. Witnesses who had feared retribution now walked with confidence. The jury had witnessed not only evidence, but a masterclass in ethical reasoning. And Marcus Kane, the once untouchable detective, had learned in the harshest possible way that skill and arrogance could never replace accountability and moral clarity. Judge Wallace's next move had shocked everyone, not by theatrics, but by quiet precision. He had turned a courtroom performance into a lesson in integrity, showing that true authority comes from character, not charm. The drama, the tension, and the human stakes combined to create a narrative that was educational, entertaining, and profoundly moving. The day's events were proof that even in the face of arrogance, deception, and ego, steadfast moral courage could prevail. And for all those who witnessed it, the jury, the spectators, and even Kane himself, the lesson was indelible. That justice is more than a concept. It is a commitment to truth, accountability, and the human values that bind society together. As the final gavel struck, silence fell over the courtroom. The same silence that had once been used by Detective Marcus Kane as a weapon, mockery followed by intimidation, now carried a completely different weight. No one laughed. No one dared to smirk. For the truth had already spoken louder than any performance Kane could deliver. Judge Wallace rose from his chair, his expression neither triumphant nor vengeful. He looked not just at Kane, but at everyone present, the jury, the spectators, the young lawyers taking notes, even the journalists who had been chasing headlines. His words were simple, but they cut deeper than any dramatic twist. Justice, he said, his voice calm, steady, resonant, is not a game, is not a stage for arrogance, and it will never bow to intimidation. We are here to protect truth, to protect people, to protect the very values that allow society to stand. Detective Kane forgot this. Let his downfall be a lesson that brilliance without integrity is not strength, is weakness. The spectators nodded. The jury sat still, and even Kane himself could not hide the weight pressing down on him. For all his wit, his cunning, and his reputation, he had been undone by the one thing he underestimated: character. Outside the courthouse, the story spread like wildfire. News outlets didn't just report on Kane's exposure. They framed it as a turning point, a reminder that justice was not about who spoke loudest or mocked hardest, but who upheld truth when it mattered most. On social media, clips of Wallace's calm rebukes trended with millions of views. Memes of Kane's once cocky smirk dissolving into stunned silence flooded the internet. What had begun as arrogance turned into a worldwide reminder of accountability. But beneath the spectacle lay something far more enduring. Young law students quoted Judge Wallace in their classes. Citizens who had lost faith in the system found a spark of hope again. And even those who came for entertainment left with something more profound. The knowledge that justice, at its best, is not about punishing. It is about teaching, about guiding, about ensuring that truth cannot be buried by ego. As Kane was escorted out, one final glance passed between him and Wallace. There was no malice, no mockery, just a quiet, unspoken truth that even those who fall the hardest can still learn if they choose to. And so, the courtroom emptied, leaving behind echoes of drama, lessons of morality, and the unforgettable shock of a judge's next move. It was more than a trial. It was a reminder to the world. Power without integrity collapses, but justice, steady, humble, and unwavering, will always endure.